get
I'm
started?
ready to start.
Okay. Subcommittee will now come to order. And the chair will recognize himself for an opening statement of 3 minutes. During markups, the chairman of the full committee and subcommittee will be given 3 minutes. The ranking member of the full committee and subcommittee will be given 3 minutes. And each other member that would like to give an opening statement will be given 2 minutes. So I'll recognize myself for 3 minutes. Today, this subcommittee embarks on its first markup of the 113th Congress. The nation still faces unacceptably high unemployment rates, and gasoline prices still remain very high, which is why approving the Keystone Pipeline expansion project makes more sense than ever. I would urge everyone here today to support H.R. 3, the Northern Route Approval Act, which gives this important pipeline its long overdue green light. And I certainly want to thank the member of this committee, Lee Terry, for his tireless efforts on behalf of this bipartisan bill. As I mentioned in our hearing last week, the Keystone Pipeline has become a household name. We're all familiar with the benefits of this project that would bring more Canadian oil to Midwestern and Gulf Coast refineries. The estimated 20,000 direct and approximately 100,000 indirect jobs alone would likely make it a more successful jobs program than any project in the $800 billion stimulus package or any other job-creating effort in this administration. And unlike federal job programs, Keystone does not have 1 penny of taxpayer dollar. In addition, the project would increase the supply of oil and help moderate the future price of oil in this country, which should come as welcome news to Americans struggling through the third straight year of gasoline prices well above $3 a gallon. It is worth noting that Keystone is probably the most extensively studied pipeline project in history, having already undergone 1 full round of NEPA review that took nearly 3 years and is currently stuck in another round of environmental review. As a matter of fact, that pile of books down there is the environmental impact study of this project. And that's not including the supplemental. Most recently, we have an updated environmental impact statement from the State Department, once again, which gives the project a clean bill of health. I would also note that the intrastate dispute over a portion of the route through Nebraska has been resolved, and Nebraska Governor Dave Heineman supports the project and wants construction to begin. It has become clear that the administration and opponents of Keystone would like nothing more than to engage in what is a seemingly endless stream of analysis followed by waves of litigation from environmental groups. No person can claim with a straight face that what we're doing today is somehow rushing this project. We need to stop giving excuses, not just for Keystone itself, but for America's economic and energy future. Many of us have a vision that America can be energy independent. And one way we can do that is to propose the Keystone Pipeline and approve this legislation today. The goal of North America's self-sufficiency is within reach, but America can't reach its potential so long as we continue to create obstacles. So I would urge everyone to support this legislation today, and at this time I recognize the gentleman from Chicago, Mr. Rush, for 3 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, there's an article in today's National Journal entitled, and I quote, "House Energy Committee's Redux Agenda," end of quote, in which the author notes that the majority party continues to push the exact same ineffective and dead-on-arrival policies that they promoted in last year's Congress, the 112th Congress, which will go down as one of the most unproductive committees in modern history. So here we are again for the umpteenth time debating a bill that would mandate approval of the Keystone Pipeline, a bill that would circumvent the ongoing State Department review process, and a bill that will limit citizens' ability, American citizens' ability, limit the ability of the American people to file lawsuits against the Keystone Project. Mr. Chairman, instead of holding hearings on the science of climate change, an issue that affects every American family and every American consumer, from the farmers of the plains and Midwest states who have seen record drought and crop loss, to the business owners and homeowners on the Gulf and the Mid-Atlantic coast who have seen their homes and livelihoods engulfed in record floods, to the firefighters who have been battling severe wildfires in Colorado, in Arizona, and in California over the past year, we are here wasting the subcommittee's time, the taxpayer dollars, on a bill that's dead on arrival, that will never see the light of the day in the Senate, and will never be signed into law by the President. Mr. Chairman, as Ranking Member Waxman and I have done in 24 letters to you and to the full committee chairman since May of 2001, I urge the majority party to make better use of this subcommittee's time and invite actual scientists and climate experts who can talk informatively about the likely impacts of unabated climate change on human health, on the environment, and also on the economy. And Mr. Chairman, I would invite the majority party to take your heads, your collective heads, out of the proverbial sand. The American people expect leadership from those of us who are sent to Washington, and it's past time for us to stop messaging and start leading. I yield back.
This time I recognize Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 3 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this is not the first time that Congress has debated a pipeline project held captive by federal red tape, despite its great potential to create jobs and increase the supply of North American energy. 40 years ago, we faced a very similar situation with the Alaskan pipeline. It took an act of Congress to break the bureaucratic impasse, limit the litigation, and achieve the Alaska pipeline's construction, and now we've got to do the same for Keystone XL. This bill, H.R. 3, the Northern Route Approval Act, will end the needless delays and finally allow construction of this landmark jobs and energy infrastructure project. The Alaska Pipeline Project was mirrored in lengthy bureaucratic delays, but after Congress enacted the Transatlantic Pipeline Authorization Act of 1973, the project moved swiftly and soon created tens of thousands of good-paying jobs at a time of high national unemployment. The Alaska Pipeline was a game changer for U.S. energy policy, and to date, it has delivered some 16 billion barrels of oil to the American market and has amassed an excellent environmental and safety record. Although the warnings of the 70s never materialized, some of the same activist groups that oppose the Alaska Pipeline have resurfaced, still peddling the stale warnings of doom and gloom from 4 decades ago. The Alaska Pipeline Bill was an acknowledgement by Congress that the environmental review process it created had strayed from its purpose and was being used to jeopardize the project clearly in the national interest. Congress never intended for the National Environmental Policy Act to become a backdoor means of stopping major projects through a process of paralysis by analysis, but we see this again with Keystone. The State Department has already produced 15,500 pages, there they are, of documents in its NEPA review of Keystone. This review is now entering its 5th year, and there is no clear end in sight, and the delays have enabled opponents to mobilize for yet lengthy fight in the courts. We can look to our past and to the Alaska Pipeline as a reason to approve Keystone, but this project is really about our future. Keystone is an opportunity to create jobs, expand our supplies of affordable and reliable North American energy, and the goal of North American energy self-sufficiency is within reach. And there are plenty of factory workers, pipe fitters, welders, laborers, electricians, and others ready to build that, create that infrastructure. There's no reason for the administration to continue dragging its feet on this jobs and energy project. In 2010, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said she was inclined to improve the pipeline. Those were her words. Almost 2 years ago, this subcommittee met to mark up Lee Terry's original bill. We moved that legislation through the House with a bipartisan vote at 279 to 147 in July of 2011. But the administration told us that they would not support the bill because they were already committed to reaching a decision before December 31st, 2011. The president last year declared that he'd do whatever it takes, his words again, to create U.S. jobs. But now we are in April of 2013, 4.5 years after Keystone's application was first filed, and the administration has yet to approve the project. It's time for us to act and get the pipeline built. This is a step towards a brighter energy future, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for 3 minutes for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, today this subcommittee is making its 3rd attempt in 2 years to grant special treatment to TransCanada's Keystone XL tar sands pipeline. This bill waives the rules to get Canada's dirty tar sands oil to the Gulf, where it can be sent to other countries. That's a great deal for oil companies that produce, sell, or refine tar sands crude like Koch, Valero, and Shell, but it's a dangerous proposition for the rest of us. In May 2012, TransCanada submitted its application for the Keystone XL pipeline northern route. The State Department drafted a supplemental environmental analysis, which was issued for public comment last month. When the public comment period ends, the State Department will finalize the environmental analysis. Then the department will take up to 90 days to determine whether approval of the project is in the public interest, considering effects on the economy, national security, the climate, and other factors. This is an appropriate process for a highly controversial project. It gives Americans an opportunity to weigh in. It allows the President to determine what is really in the best interests of the country, and it attempts to ensure that if the project does go forward, we do it as safely as possible. But this bill would short-circuit the process and dictate the result. It would grant the permits by congressional fiat. It would lock out the public, eliminate the President's responsibility to balance competing interests, and block federal agencies from minimizing destruction of wetlands and endangered species habitats. Even if you support the pipeline, you should oppose this bill. I oppose both the bill and the pipeline because Keystone XL is a bad deal for America. We get all of the risks while oil companies profit by expanding production of the dirtiest oil on the planet and sending it overseas. My greatest concern is the climate impacts. Experts tell us that building Keystone XL will let oil companies triple production of the tar sands. That's simply not consistent with any future scenario for avoiding catastrophic climate change. There are other grave risks as well, particularly for communities in the path of the pipeline, as the Mayflower spill showed us once again. The subcommittee's job is to address the most pressing energy, air quality, and climate problems facing America today, but instead of doing our job, we're busy granting special favors for oil companies.
Thank you. The chair would remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record, and any member wishing to make an opening statement will be given 2 minutes. Gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this markup and for bringing this legislation. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill to finally greenlight the Keystone Pipeline. You know, I'm not sure what President Obama is waiting for, but American families have been asking for this project for years when they look at the fact that there's 20,000 American jobs that will be created, billions of dollars of private investment, and there will also be energy security that gets increased by us developing a trading relationship with Canada for 1 million barrels of oil a day that we won't have to be getting from Middle Eastern countries who don't like us. When families are experiencing the pain at the pump right now, people are paying somewhere around $3.50 a gallon. They're going to be paying closer to $4 a gallon gas this summer, and they're fed up with this administration's continuous refusal to explore American energy. And Keystone is a no-brainer. I mean, literally with the stroke of a pen, President Obama could create 20,000 American jobs and increase American energy security, and for 4 years now he's chosen to say no. So I'm glad that this committee is willing to say yes to American energy and to American jobs and finally start pursuing an all-of-the-above energy strategy. You know, when the president loves talking about energy production's never been higher since he's been president, he fails to mention the fact that on federal lands, energy production's been down because of his administration's policies. It's only on private lands where it's been up, and that's where the president's been trying to shut that down, ironically. You know, with EPA, with Department of Interior, he's got every federal agency out there trying to beat up on American energy and make it harder to produce energy in this country, when at the same time you look at what China's trying to do. China said, look, if America doesn't want the oil, we'll take it. And the bottom line is we use millions of barrels of oil every single day. And who are we going to get it from? Are we going to get it from a friend in Canada who wants to build this pipeline and spend that private money and create those American jobs, or keep giving it to these Middle Eastern countries who don't like us and sending billions more of our dollars there? It's a no-brainer. Unfortunately, President Obama doesn't realize that, but I'm glad, Mr. Chairman, that you do, and that we'll pass this out of the committee. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, from California, Mr. McNerney, for opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The thing that bothers me about this bill is that everything is deemed. You deem the final EIS issued as of August 26, 2011. It deems the incidental take permit issued from the American Bearing Beetle, the right-of-way and temporary use permits issued, and it deems a special permit for the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Where's the truth in these things? I mean, you can't just deem the truth. I think we're taking a very bad precedent here, and we need to worry about what the long-term implications of this bill are. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone seek gentleman from Nebraska, Ms. Terry, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, this is something that we've worked on for over 2 years. After 1,650-ish days that this permit's been filed, and over, as you can see down here, 15,000 pages of environmental reviews, at least 2 public hearings, services of public hearings, 3 studies with public comments today, enough is enough. Like what happened in the early 70s with the Alaskan pipeline, it just became mired in all of the bureaucracy. No decisions could be made until Congress finally stepped in. So the precedent was made for this action. In fact, the bill that I filed, H.R. 3, closely mirrors the Alaskan pipeline, what Congress had to do in 1972, with great support from Congress. My bill declares that no presidential permit is required for this project and deems the final EIS of August 26, 2011, along with the additional work of Nebraska, as sufficient. That's where the truth lies. Right there, we're deeming it. The additional provisions of the bill will ensure that the pipeline can't be delayed by nefarious series of litigation or other attempts to delay this project indefinitely. My bill helps make America more energy secure by reducing our dependence on foreign oil sources. Instead of relying on OPEC nations, we rely on our partner, Canada. So we get energy security, we get thousands of infrastructure jobs. This is a win-win for America, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. There are further opening statements. Gentleman, Mr. Engel from New York, is recognized for two minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have not made up my mind on the Keystone Pipeline. But having said that, I think that it's unfortunate that we're yet marking up a bill that would bypass the process the government has in place. Though the process may not be moving as quickly as some of my colleagues would prefer, it is moving. Right now, we're in the public comment period of the draft environmental impact statement, and that part will close on April 22nd. We must let this process play out the way it is meant to by law. This method ensures that all environmental and safety issues are properly addressed. I'm torn because I would rather buy oil from Canada than from countries that are hostile to us, like Venezuela or the Saudi royal family. But having said that, I share concerns about this project with many of my constituents and colleagues. Question, for instance, is what do the American people get? In last week's hearing, I could not get an answer as to how much oil would actually remain in the United States vis-a-vis being exported. Will this do anything to lower gas prices? Will this help make us energy independent? So I think there are questions that need to be asked and settled, and I don't think that we should short-circuit the process. This is something that's very, very serious. We should let it play out and then make a reasonable decision after the process is played out. So I oppose this legislation, and I think that we ought to, again, be more concerned about having it balanced rather than short-circuiting the process that we already have in place. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Pitts, did you have an opening statement? Mr. Latta, do you have an opening statement? Mr. Cassidy? Mr. McKinley? The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we've heard a lot about numbers, so let me try to phrase it in a different way. Just go back to 2008, just 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the construction industry had 8 million people in America working, supporting their families. Today, there are 5.8 million. We've lost 2.2 million jobs in construction industry. 2008, the unemployment rate was 7.4% in the construction industry. Today, it's 15%. Price of gasoline, 2008, was $1.85. Now we're talking about $3.75. Anyone in their right mind would see we're going in the wrong direction. For the families, the working families in America, they want us to take action. We have an opportunity here to create 20,000 jobs. Now some say, as my friend, colleague from Massachusetts said, these are, what was the quote, what's in it for us except a few thousand temporary jobs building a pipeline? Those temporary jobs take care of families. They take care of food, housing, insurance. That's part of our industry, is our families, taking care of them. And if these are temporary jobs, I've never heard that comment made until I came here to Washington. Construction industry has built our homes, they've built our federal buildings, they've built building after building all across America. And it's time that we take more consideration for the working men and women of this country and stop this hemorrhaging of our job loss in the construction industry and put our people back to work. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Tonko, did you want to do an opening statement? Okay. Mr. Green, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep the statement brief. I've been a long-time supporter of the Keystone XL pipeline. I'm frustrated the pipeline still has not been approved, but with 4 favorable environmental impact statements comprised of thousands of pages of analysis, it's time for the administration to move this project. Any further delay is ridiculous. I plan to support the bill this afternoon, but let me be clear about a couple things. I support the bill because it's mainly a messaging bill. It's time the administration stops stalling on the decision. That said, I do not support the precedent policy and policies laid out in sections 4 through 8, nor do I think we need to spend the committee's time on another Keystone bill when we've spent thousands of hours in the past on it. I also don't know why we consider a bill that doesn't go anywhere in the Senate except it's a message, and I'll agree to that today. I hope after tomorrow we can put this issue behind us and start considering other bills that may have a chance to become law. Issues within the jurisdiction of the subcommittee are far too important to risk another 2 years of inaction. Thank you again. I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Pompeo, do you have an opening statement? Mr. Kinzinger, Mr. Griffith, Mr. Doyle. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Christensen is recognized for 2 minutes. Dr. Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, am deeply concerned about the aggressive manner in which H.R. 3, the Northern Route Approval Act, is being pushed through the committee. This is the third attempt in 2 years to support a pipeline that will carry tar sands, which is significantly more greenhouse gas intensive than conventional oil from Canada to the Gulf Coast. And this bill is particularly troubling as it would essentially give one project a regulatory earmark without careful consideration of the potentially devastating impacts to the public health, climate, and our natural resources. Raw tar sands crude is significantly more toxic and acidic than other types of crude oil, and during the refining process may release a greater volume of harmful pollutants into the air. These pollutants are detrimental to human health and can increase the incidence of lung and respiratory diseases. We need to consider just how much we're willing to risk and put at stake, because between 2000 and 2009, pipeline accidents were responsible for 2,794 significant incidents and 161 fatalities in the United States. Within the past few years, there have been multiple incidents of spills and other related disasters, and we know it can take a long time to clean up after a spill, like in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where the water is still polluted 3 years later. So rather than subverting the federal process and putting vulnerable communities at risk, we should question whether we really need another pipeline and instead offer assistance to distressed communities like my district, where American citizens are unreasonably burdened by electricity that costs 5 times the national average. And we can create jobs just as easily in a green economy. But we cannot continue to ignore the consequences of this project, and we cannot continue to ignore the public health and climate change impacts and those who truly need our help. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Castor, that concludes today's opening statements. Did we get Terry? Yeah. So at this point, the chair would call up H.R. 3 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 3, to approve the construction, operation, and maintenance of the Keystone XL pipeline and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to this bill? Are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3, offered by Mr. Rush of Illinois.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I strongly disagree with the majority side's process of trying to immediately expedite approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. Expediting the approval of Keystone XL pipeline, even as ExxonMobil continues to clean up the Pegasus oil spill in Mayflower, Arkansas, which ruptured on March 29th while carrying crude oil from my home state of Illinois to the Gulf Coast in Texas. Currently, it is still unclear why the Pegasus leak occurred, but here today, my Republican colleagues are trying to force through another major pipeline project, even before the American people have the answers for what is the cause of the most recent oil spill. This bill before us today, H.R. 3, does little to allay the American people's fears that the majority party is putting the public interest second as it curtails the environmental review process while also limiting the ability of average citizens to redress their grievances through the judicial system. H.R. 3 will remove all judicial review of the Keystone Pipeline out of the hands of state and local courts and will give the D.C. Court, the D.C. Court of Appeals, exclusive jurisdiction over the project, bearing intervention by the Supreme Court. While this provision may not be cause for concern for those who are wealthy, those who are more affluent, who have the means to travel to D.C. if they have legitimate claims to a suit. But I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, that there are many American families who would be simply unable to accept the hardship that you want to heap on them with this particular bill. So, Mr. Chairman, my amendment is fairly straightforward, very straightforward. My amendment would simply delete Section 4, the judicial review clause, to allow everyday, ordinary American citizens, those who are struggling economically, give them the ability to keep their rights intact and not limit their ability to file a legal claim. They can't afford to come to Washington, D.C. in order to sue regarding the Keystone XL pipeline. Many citizens will be unjustly affected by losing their legal right to file a claim in their own home state or in their local jurisdiction, simply because some on the other side wanted to clear any remaining annoyances, any remaining little bitty hurdle, and expeditiously ram this project through. Shame on us, shame on those on the other side. Allow the American people their right to sue, to get a hearing before the bar of justice. It is their country also. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does anyone seek recognition in opposition?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate that. The shame should go on poor staff work that misinterpreted the clear language of this bill. Just a few of the points here that were raised is somehow we have removed jurisdiction or prevented lawsuits. The reality is the opposite. There was no cloture of or prevention of citizen lawsuits here. And those that have been involved in legislation in the past know that what occurs when lawsuits are filed under the Clean Air or Clean Water Act is that the NRDC is the law firm, Sierra Club finds a member, and they bring the lawsuit. It is traditional that lawsuits based on the legislation or the jurisdiction thereof is done in the courts in Washington, D.C. that have the level of expertise. This is normal course of business type of stuff, and in fact, this language of putting a shot clock on the filing of the citizen lawsuits that are preserved was also part of the Alaskan pipeline bill that was frankly done after on conference on a voice vote, so unanimously accepted back then. And it's necessary today. Why is it necessary that we have this 60-day filing? Well, first of all, we know because the NRDC, Sierra Club, and other environmental organizations have already said that they have the lawsuits waiting. It is traditional that the lawsuits from the environmental organizations are filed. What also happens, and we've seen this all over the United States, where what happens is they abuse the right of the citizen lawsuit, because what they'll do is file one lawsuit today. It'll take 2 years to get through. The court rules against the petitioner or the plaintiff. Then they go back and file their second lawsuit, then their third lawsuit. I've seen some of these projects that after 20 years are still in court and the project never happens. It's that level of war of attrition using the courts that we're limiting here. We aren't doing away with the right of the citizen lawsuit. All we're saying is that, look, you've already said that you've got the petitions ready to go. So since you already got them ready to go, file them within the first 60 days. And that after 60 days, then that's your statute of limitations for filing, and that we've got a finite plan. Why is it important that we remove this opportunity to delay to infinity? Is because we've already seen that's what the plan is. We've seen the president deny the permit well over a year ago because it may have interfered with his election. We're seeing repetitive environmental studies. We're seeing multiple sets of hearings, multiple requests for comment periods, and it is likely that they'll come up with some new excuse in the future to delay this. I have no doubt in my mind that the President of the United States wants to delay this to the point where people just forget about it. Well, I'll tell you what, our energy independence is too important. Our energy security is too important. The creation of the jobs are too important to delay any longer. This is the 1,650th day of this permit. This is going almost 3 times longer than any other permit crossing a border. So it's time we act. These are fair. We don't close out any states' rights here. If there's a state-based lawsuit, there is nothing in this bill that prevents that filing. In fact, they have already stated that they have petitions ready to file in the state. We can only deal with the federal matters and the jurisdictions. And so that's why we've done it this way. And again, this isn't precedent setting. This is exactly what had to happen on the Alaskan pipeline to get that built as well, to remove the barriers of delay, the reasons for delay. We've delayed enough. Enough is enough here. Let's get this going. Does anybody else want a minute? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Hold on, I got to listen.
Mr. Chairman, I support this amendment. This bill has many flaws. It provides special treatment for a particular project pushed by TransCanada Corporation. It approves a massive, long-lived infrastructure project that will allow tar sands producers to proceed with plans to triple their current production. And this bill locks the public out of the ongoing decision-making process on this highly controversial project. The bill effectively short-circuits the environmental review process by deeming all requirements met and all permits issued. And it declares by fiat that an environmental review of previous versions of the project satisfies virtually all federal legal requirements. It even decrees that the Keystone XL pipeline will not harm endangered species, habitat, or migratory birds. So this committee has the power to decree such things. Essentially, this bill is designed to make the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline immune from legal challenges. The bill effectively eliminates any challenges to the adequacy and thoroughness of the environmental review and permitting processes, which are curtailed by the bill. As a fail-safe, the bill then goes on to require that any challenge to a federal action related to Keystone XL pipeline be heard by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rather than the usual courts of jurisdiction. This provision is a boon to D.C. lawyers, and more troubling, it would effectively block legal challenges by those who live elsewhere and lack the resources to come to court in Washington, D.C. The environmental groups are all stationed right here in Washington. So who's being kept out? Well, people who live in Nebraska or North Dakota or South Dakota or anywhere along the line that might have be impacted by this tar sands pipeline. The pipelines, and that is not the usual course for legislation. Only in the area of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act is there a restriction at the D.C. area, and that's when something applies nationally. But if something affecting any particular region, it's in the circuit where that region is located. The pipeline supporters want to expedite the permit decisions, but moving judicial review from one court to another doesn't necessarily expedite anything. It does, however, make it more burdensome and costly for affected individuals, communities, businesses, state and local governments to participate in the process by forcing them to travel to D.C. to make their case. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to criticize centralized government and bash Washington, D.C. They extol the virtues of local control. But this bill would centralize judicial control right here in Washington, D.C. This amendment would simply strike the provisions, the Rush Amendment, which I urge members to vote for, strike the provisions sending all challenges to the Keystone XL pipeline to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. The Bush Amendment will not cure this fatally flawed bill, and I'm going to certainly continue to oppose it even if this amendment passes. But this amendment does stand up for the right of American people to challenge their government actions in the courts, and it would ensure that this right is not curtailed by playing games with the jurisdiction of the courts. We can give people rights on paper, but if they can't exercise them as a practical matter, they're effectively worthless. So I support the Rush Amendment, urge my colleagues to vote for it as well.
Gentleman yields back.
Yield back.
The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes, and while I have a great deal of respect for the gentleman from Illinois, I do want to just emphasize that some people are under the impression that we're short-circuiting environmental studies on this project. I might say that TransCanada submitted its first application for a presidential permit on September 19, 2008. That was 1,670 days ago. The environmental and safety review process for the first application took nearly 3 years to complete. The Department of State has publicly released over 15,500 pages of documents relating to NEPA analysis and indicated that there was not serious environmental issues. 11 federal agencies participated in reviewing Keystone. Every state affected by the proposed Keystone route has independently reviewed and approved the pipeline. H.R. 3 does not short-circuit the NEPA process. It merely authorizes the original, full, and complete NEPA process and its 15,500 pages of extensive review to serve as the record of review for the pipeline. And I might also say that the language in this bill mirrors the language for judicial review of the Alaska Natural Gas Pipeline Act that became law in 2004. And I might also say that there were limits to judicial review in the Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade legislation as well as the Dodd-Frank bill, so there's not anything really unusual about this language. Is there anyone else on our side of the aisle?
May I?
I would yield my 3 minutes to Mr. Terry.
And I only need a handful of seconds here. In addition to the fact that the environmental studies were done, the agencies participated, there's been intensive review of it. It's about, almost 2 years since those have been filed. So if they haven't had time to review it in 2 years, I'm not sure, well, why they've waited. They haven't, really. But also the point is that those studies have also been open for comment. They went through the comment period. The public has been had the opportunity to submit their statements already. There was also a series of hearings in addition to the comment period that have been done on these environmental studies. And so, you know, to sit there and say that the public's being shut out of this when they've done more than the statute requires for public comment and hearings, it's just a fallacy. It's just not correct to say that the public's been shut out of this. What we're seeing is extraordinary efforts here. They've already done another comment period that wasn't necessary. But they did it anyway. There's a public hearing this Thursday. To sit there and say you got to do what, the third or fourth round of public hearing that's not legislatively required seems to be excessive and gives further evidence that the whole purpose is to delay this so that the people forget about it and it'll never be built. Yield back my time to the chairman.
Yield back the balance of my time. Is there further? The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. I support Mr. Rush's amendment. Section 4 of this bill grants TransCanada special status in the federal judicial system. And why are we granting a foreign company special consideration over the consideration of our own citizens? This entire bill is nothing more than a rubber stamp for the project, a project that offers limited public benefits at significant public risks. If the case for this project is as strong as its proponents claim, the federal courts should present only a small hurdle for the company. The tar sands are not going anywhere. We have other pipelines and other means to transport this oil available today. This is all about expansion of tar sands activity, not about access to this resource. Since demand for petroleum products here in the U.S. is stable, and much of this product is destined for other markets, there is no justification for trampling the rights of our citizens to have this project reviewed by the courts. The pipeline, if built, will operate for some 50 years. Another year or two devoted to the guarantee of due process for our citizens is a small price to pay for ensuring this project is in the public interest and is being constructed in the safest and least damaging way possible. I urge support for Mr. Rush's amendment, and with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion of the amendment of Mr. Rush? Seeing no one seeking recognition for further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. The nays have it, and the amendment is not agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a roll call vote.
The gentleman from Illinois requests a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Scalise?
No.
Mr. Scalise? No. Mr. Hall? No. Mr. Hall? No. Mr. Shimkus? No. Mr. Shimkus? No. Mr. Pitts? No. Mr. Pitts? No. Mr. Terry? No. Mr. Terry? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Latta? Mr. Latta? No. Mr. Cassidy? Aye. Mr. Cassidy? Aye. Mr. Olson? No. Mr. Olson? No. Mr. McKinley? Mr. McKinley? No. Mr. Gardner? Mr. Gardner? No. Mr. Pompeo? Mr. Pompeo? No. Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Kinzinger? No. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Barton? Mr. Upton? No. Mr. Upton? No. Chairman Whitfield?
No.
Chairman Whitfield? No. Mr. Rush?
Aye.
Mr. Rush? Aye. Mr. McNerney? Aye. Mr. McNerney? Aye. Mr. Tonko? Aye. Mr. Tonko? Aye. Mr. Markey? Mr. Engel? Aye. Mr. Engel? Aye. Mr. Green? Aye. Mr. Green? Aye. Ms. Capps? Ms. Capps? Aye. Mr. Doyle? Yes. Mr. Doyle? Aye. Mr. Barrow? No. Mr. Barrow? No. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Christensen? Aye. Ms. Christensen? Aye. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor? Aye. Mr. Waxman?
Aye.
Mr. Waxman? Aye.
Is there any other person seeking to cast their vote at this time? The clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, there are 15 nays and 11 ayes.
15 nays, 11 ayes. The agreement is not agreed to. Are there further amendments to this bill? I'm sorry? Yeah, would you repeat the count?
11 yeas and 15, or 11 yeas and 15 noes.
11 yeas, 15 noes. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments at this time to be offered? If not, then the question would now occur on favorably forwarding to the full committee H.R. 3, the Northern Route Approval Act. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 3 is. The gentleman from California requests a roll call vote. Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Scalise. Aye. Mr. Scalise, aye. Mr. Hall. Aye. Mr. Hall, aye. Mr. Shimkus. Aye. Mr. Shimkus, aye. Mr. Pitts. Aye. Mr. Pitts, aye. Mr. Terry. Aye. Mr. Terry, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Latta. Aye. Mr. Latta, aye. Mr. Cassidy. Aye. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Olson. Aye. Mr. Olson, aye. Mr. McKinley. Aye. Mr. McKinley, aye. Mr. Gardner. Aye. Mr. Gardner, aye. Mr. Pompeo. Aye. Mr. Pompeo, aye. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Kinzinger, aye. Mr. Griffith. Aye. Mr. Griffith, aye. Mr. Barton. Mr. Upton. Aye. Mr. Upton, aye. Mr. Rush.
No. No.
Mr. Rush, no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney, no. Mr. Tonko. No. Mr. Tonko, no. Mr. Markey. Mr. Engel. No. Mr. Engel, no. Mr. Green. Aye. Mr. Green, aye. Ms. Capps. Aye. Ms. Capps, aye. Mr. Doyle. No. Mr. Doyle, no. Mr. Barrow. Aye. Mr. Barrow, aye. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Christensen. No. Ms. Christensen, no. Ms. Castor. Ms. Castor, no. Mr. Waxman. No. Mr. Waxman, no. Chairman Whitfield.
Aye.
Mr. Whitfield, aye.
How was Ms. Capps recorded?
Ms. Capps votes aye.
Sure. I think she wants to change her vote.
Ms. Capps votes no.
Yeah. Anyone else seek to vote or change their vote?
Mr. Chairman, I was trying by osmosis to pick up.
Good try, good try.
Good try, thanks. Well, the clerk will please report the result.
Mr. Chairman, there are 17 ayes and 9 noes.
17 ayes, 9 noes. The bill is favorably reported. The ayes have it. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the bill favorably forwarded by the subcommittee today. So ordered. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.